Misterio, ciencia y espectáculo en un solo evento. Uno de los hombres que desde luego más están dando que hablar a tenor de este estudio sobre el Atlas es Avi Loeb. Él es físico, científico de Harvard, que de nuevo está con nosotros en Negocios Televisión. Hi Avi, thanks for being again with us here in Negocios TV. It's a pleasure having you here. Thank you.
My great pleasure to join you.
Thanks for being here in Negocios TV, talking about the Atlas. We would like to do more questions. I would like to ask you about this meteorite. What is different from this Atlas?
Yeah, so Atlas was discovered in July 2025, and it has 9 anomalies, things that are quite unusual about it. First, its size. It's bigger than 5 kilometers. And about 1 million times more massive than the first interstellar object that we discovered 8 years ago, Oumuamua. And so it's surprising that the third object we find is 1 million times more massive than the first one. And moreover, it lies in the plane of the planets around the sun. It came very close to Mars on October 2nd. And then it will come close to Venus shortly, and eventually get very close to Jupiter on March 16, 2026. And that begs the question of whether the trajectory was designed by some intelligence. There was also nickel with very little iron coming out of it. Also, not much water coming out of it, only 4% by mass, as far as we saw. And just a few days ago, it came closest to the sun on October 29th. We couldn't see it from Earth because it's on the opposite side of the sun. But some other observatories that are orbiting the sun were able to look at it, and it became extremely bright very rapidly close to the sun, and obtained a color that is bluer than the sun. And in addition, it displayed some non-gravitational acceleration. It deviated from the original trajectory that we expected it to go on. And that, if it's a natural comet, then we would expect that it lost about 20% of its mass. So there should be a very massive cloud of dust or gas around it, weighing of order 5 billion tons. So in the coming weeks, we should be able to tell if there is a very massive cloud of gas around it, in which case it might be a comet of natural origin. But if we don't see this massive cloud, then the non-gravitational acceleration that it displayed may have originated from something else, maybe an engine, maybe it's a technological object. So we should keep our options open as of now until we get better data.
Waiting for more data, Avi, I would like to ask you about this Atlas, and we would like to ask you about if it could be the first step toward discovering life or intelligence beyond the Earth.
It could be if it happens to be technological in origin. There is a question of why it arrived in the plane of the planets around the sun. Why is it so massive? 1 million times more massive than the first object. We should have seen millions of those smaller objects before we see a big one. And also all kinds of other anomalies about the material that it has, and the kind of glow that it had ahead of it, in front of it, towards the sun early on, opposite to what we often see in comets. So the verdict should come out of the data that we will get in the coming weeks. It will get closest to the Earth on December 19th, about 6 days before Christmas. And my hope is that it will not deliver any unwanted gifts for the holidays to Earth. We should watch it. We should check if there are any probes that may have been released by such an object, and they arrive to Earth or to Mars, where we have orbiters that can monitor the situation.
Waiting for this 19th of December, I would like to ask you about the Atlas and the change speed and direction in its tail. Why does Atlas has made these changes?
Yeah, so this change in trajectory was reported on October 29th, just a few days ago, and it was inferred from a deviation that was measured by the ALMA observatory in Chile, and we are still waiting for more data, but I calculated that if this was triggered by mass loss as the object got close to the sun, so that it got a recoil in the standard way that comets get, then it should have lost a significant fraction of its mass, about a sixth of its mass, and that implies that there should be 5 billion tons of material around it that were lost, and it's a major mass loss that should reveal the nature of the object if that's the case. But it could also be a completely different propulsion method that has to do with technology, and for that we have to keep our minds open. And so we will see in the coming weeks what the origin of this non-gravitational acceleration is, how big it is. But the first time it was reported was just a few days ago.
Maybe some people, some experts are talking about this 3i Atlas, this acceleration, and some people is talking about that it's becoming more bluer. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so the acceleration, I should say, if it came from a technological origin, then it makes sense, because that's you expect to get the most efficient boost to the velocity at closest approach to the sun, taking advantage of the gravitational assist of the sun. That we do that with spacecraft. But in general, we just don't know what is the origin of that acceleration, and the object became indeed bluer than the sun when it came closest to it. That's surprising, because usually when an object loses mass in the form of dust, dust reddens an object, it becomes redder. And also red means a cool temperature. And usually we expect these objects to have much cooler temperature than the surface of the sun, because they are at a distance from the surface, and we expect the 3i Atlas to have a temperature of order a few hundred degrees above absolute zero. That's 20 times smaller than the surface temperature of the sun of 5,800 degrees. So it should have appeared red relative to the sun. Nevertheless, it's blue. So there are two possibilities again. One is that this blue color was obtained from carbon monoxide that lost an electron. That's a molecule that can, in principle, generate blue light. And if there is a lot of carbon monoxide, the CO, near the object, it might be the origin of the blue light. But another possibility is that the object has an engine that is much hotter than the surface temperature of the sun, and that's where the blue color comes from.
Well, waiting for more info about this 3i Atlas, I would like to ask you about this Hawking sphere, this Stephen Hawking sphere, who talk about remain silent in the face of possible alien civilizations. What do you think about this Hawking sphere of talking about these subjects?
Yeah, it's possible that the aliens are not far from us, and they're listening, and they respond to whatever happens on Earth. We were not careful. We were transmitting signals throughout the last century, and the question is someone listening? And it's possible that we would get a visit once we pose a threat to a neighbor that we are not aware of. And so it would have been wiser for us to be more careful in transmitting signals. But, the cat is already out of the bag. And as of now, we just need to monitor objects that enter the solar system to make sure that all of them are rocks, and none of them is a tennis ball that was thrown by a neighbor.
Well, a lot of questions about this 3i Atlas. I would like to ask you about the NASA. Is it true that the NASA has hidden the best photo of this comet, of this 3i Atlas, the best photograph?
The highest resolution images that were obtained of 3i Atlas were taken on October 2nd and 3rd by the HiRISE camera on board the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. We haven't seen those images, and that's quite unfortunate because they have a resolution of 30 kilometers per pixel. So we can, in principle, see the vicinity of the object and infer how big it is. It's also a side view of the object for the first time that could give us a lot of information about the material coming out of it. So this data is very precious and it's time sensitive because when we analyze this data, we can infer what kind of future observations we want to take. But unfortunately, NASA did not release this data because of the government shutdown that started on October 1st. And I just think that scientific data should not be held hostage to politics, and it doesn't take much effort to actually share the data with other scientists. Representative Anna Paulina Luna sent a letter on Friday, just a few days ago, to the acting administrator of NASA asking that the data would be released. I contacted the principal investigator of the HiRISE camera, and I didn't get a response to my emails. So this is unfortunate because the acting administrator of NASA did respond to Kim Kardashian on the same day that Representative Luna sent her letter. Kardashian was curious about the 3i Atlas and asked for more details about it. And Sean Duffy, the administrator of NASA, responded immediately and explained that there is nothing to worry about, no risk to Earth, and he explained to her what 3i Atlas is. So apparently, he was much more willing to respond to Kim Kardashian than to a request from Congress and a scientist, the scientific community that really wants to analyze this data. And I hope the data will be released very soon.
Waiting for this data, waiting for the NASA. I would like to ask you about the 19th of December. We were talking about his pass for the land. When will this comet pass by, and does it pose any danger to the Earth?
There is no danger to Earth if it continues along the path that we are expecting it to go through, as long as it doesn't maneuver and start to approach us, or as long as it doesn't release any mini probes that approach the Earth, we should be completely safe. The closest it gets to Earth is about 250 million kilometers, according to the predicted trajectory. That's not very close. We shouldn't worry about any impact on Earth. In fact, it was avoiding Earth even when it came closest to the Sun. It was on the opposite side of the Sun relative to Earth. So the key point about the 19th of December, when it gets closest to Earth, is that this would be the best time to observe it. And there are hundreds of observatories around Earth that could look at it. In fact, there is a campaign that is organized by the International Asteroid Warning Network that decided to coordinate these observations between the 27th of November and the 27th of January. And this is an organization that is embraced by the United Nations. I'm very happy that they initiated this campaign, because I sent also a white paper to the United Nations a few weeks earlier, encouraging them to do just that. The best way for us to learn about the nature of 3i Atlas is by collecting as much data as possible. If we assume that we know the answer in advance, the way that some scientists pretend, then unfortunately, we might not be eager to collect the data, and that's the worst we can do.
Waiting for this 19th of December, I would like to ask you about what could say this 3i Atlas if it could talk to us. What do you think it would tell us about its origin?
Yeah, so that is a very interesting question. Even if it's natural, it's clear that it's very different from the known comets in the solar system. because so far it shed mostly carbon dioxide, and very differently from comets that we are familiar with in the solar system that are water rich. And also it had a glow in the direction of the sun instead of going in the opposite direction, the way we see for comets, and has nickel with very little iron. So all kinds of anomalies that we are not familiar with. And we can, once we understand what these mean, once we know more about its nature, then we can infer where it may have come from. It came with a very unusual speed of 60 kilometers per second relative to the sun when it entered the solar system, and that's much higher than the typical local population of stars. So if it's natural, it should have come from an old star. The old stars are usually getting a lot of kicks to their velocities during their lifespan, and in addition, it should have formed under circumstances that are different than solar system comets. And if it lost a substantial fraction of its mass when it came close to the sun, we can analyze that and figure out its composition nature. Now, if it's technological, of course, it's a completely new experience for us. And this is a giant object, bigger than a city. So the question is, how did the civilization launch such a massive object? And what kind of power supply does it have inside? Our biggest rocket is Starship, which is less than 100 meters, less than the size of a football field. This one is the size of a city. It's very different dimensions. So there are probably a lot of things for us to learn from whichever technological civilization sent it. And the best way to learn is by getting as much data as possible about it when we have the opportunity. The benefit of 3i Atlas is that it came in the plane of the planet, so we have a lot of observatories that can look at it. It's also very big, so it's quite bright, and we can detect it with many instruments. So altogether, it's a gift from interstellar space, and I see it as a blind date. And in a blind date of interstellar proportions, it's very important to observe the other side rather than to have an opinion prematurely.
Talking about some opinions, Avi, I would like to ask you about Elon Musk. He was talking today about this 3i Atlas, and he said it would obliterate a continent. What do you think about these remarks from Elon Musk?
Oh, definitely. I mean, he was talking with Joe Rogan on the podcast a couple of days after I appeared on Joe Rogan. So you can check the details of what I talked with Joe Rogan as well. But what Elon Musk says is correct. I mean, the mass of this object is bigger than 33 billion tons. So it's comparable to the mass of the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. It's a very massive object that would create a lot of damage if it collided with Earth. But as of now, it doesn't seem to approach Earth. It would be relatively far, so we don't need to worry about it. The only thing, if it's technological, it might actually release some mini probes that we can look for, or we should watch out its non-gravitational acceleration, whether it changes direction and starts approaching the Earth. Then, of course, everything will change.
Well, a lot of questions about these 3i Atlas. I would like to ask you about yourself. Avi, you have been criticized for challenging the scientific consensus. Why do you think the academic establishment reacts like that to the ideas that are not the ordinary, are a little different? What is your answer for these people?
Well, science is a great privilege because it allows us to stay curious and not assume that past knowledge describes everything we see. So science should be guided by data, by observations, rather than by prejudice. We know that from the days when the Vatican basically put Galileo Galilei in house arrest because he said something different than they were arguing for. And the Earth was moving around the sun for 4.5 billion years before the Vatican even existed. So whether my colleagues are saying something or I say something is completely irrelevant as to what nature brings to our backyard. We just need to observe it, collect as much data. And in case we see anomalies, we should be curious about them rather than push them aside. And the reason is simple. A technological visitor to our backyard, something that was sent by another intelligence, poses immediate consequences to the future of humanity, and we need to consider it seriously, because even if the probability for that is small, the implications are huge. And when you multiply small probability by huge implications, it means that you need to take it seriously. This is called the black swan event, and the intelligence agencies take seriously events that could have a low probability but have huge implications. Scientists are not used to that because they often deal with very little consequences to society. If we were to consider an exploding star at a distance of billions of light years, nothing will change in our daily life. But when we have a visitor to our backyard, it might enter through the front door. And so we should take seriously the possibility that it might be technological and use as much data as possible to figure things out. And those critics that say we should not discuss this possibility because it's unlikely, they don't understand how we need to face societal threats. It's a very different situation than we usually encounter in science.
The science talking about these three-eyed atlas. Avi, thanks for being with us in Nauseous TV. Thanks for answering all our questions. It's a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much, Avi. Thank you.
It was a great pleasure joining you, and I would be glad to speak with you anytime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avi. We are talking about these three-eyed atlas. Vamos a seguir con más entrevistas, con más expertos sobre este tres-eyed atlas. Escuchaban a Avi Loeb comparando este asteroide con el que acabó con los dinosaurios. Nos venía a decir también, bueno, pues que no tenía mucho sentido que el tres-eyed atlas pase cerca del Sol y se vuelva azul en lugar de volverse rojo. Nos hablaba también sobre estas declaraciones de Elon Musk, que les contábamos a eso de las 12 de la mañana aquí en España, que decía, bueno, pues que podría arrasar un continente. Nos confirmaba el propio Avi que está en lo cierto. Nos decía, bueno, pues que su tamaño es comparable al asteroide que acabó con los dinosaurios. Vamos